On March 6, ladies and gentlemen, 2026, Burkina Faso's young military leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore, made a dramatic declaration from now on, every citizen, mark my words, every citizen has access to the presidential palace. This particular bold move shocked and stunned the world, okay, as Captain Ibrahim Traore invited rural and village women whom he had helped with water to nurture their crops to actually join him in a celebration of Women's Day. These women brought food in return, ladies and gentlemen, to join him in a collective celebration of unity and, of course, resilience. The Western media reports this as an unusual leadership gesture and, of course, action. But the truth is actually far deeper. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first and primary step of a new African blueprint, okay? One where leaders are actually no longer distant figures, but brothers and, of course, sisters among their people, reshaping the political fabric to elevate their people, especially the undeserved. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, this moment is actually more than a symbolism, okay? It is actually a pivotal instance in Africa's rise to global prominence, okay? As global powers continue to push for their interest, Burkina Faso and, of course, its leaders especially are rewriting the rules. This is the front line of a global shift towards a multipolar world where Africa stands at the helm of its destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, now before we actually go deeper into this, please don't forget to actually like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because we are here always to make sure that we analyze important developments like this with important people like you. So kindly join us.
Welcome. 1 year ago, I think that we must thank God who allowed us to act differently and for women to also understand our vision for women's freedom. So welcome once again. I recall that it was during the event of the 8th of March in the previous year that we first arrived at this Zongo perimeter, which allowed us to see the hardship, the suffering of the women who were working the area for securing their harvest, for water supply, agricultural equipment and inputs, which led us to take the necessary measures so that they could have these developed plots, and that production is now a tangible reality. I'm glad they are happy. They could produce. The farm equipment was an initial outlay, so we took the necessary steps to ensure they had these fitted out areas, making production a tangible reality today. I'm very glad to see they are happy to have produced full-time. It's not just the season, they produce in any season. Look at the corn. In March today, the fresh corn that they managed to produce, and all the vegetables. And that's what we wanted. And so, by means of this, they have been freed. That is emancipation, contrary to what those imperialists tried to make us believe regarding the emancipation of women as they define it. For us, our emancipation is evident right here. They desire to work, they wish to express themselves, and they aim for autonomy. And we give them the space to express themselves for that. And that is emancipation, that is autonomy. You see that things have changed. There are no more janjoba or celebrations. That's not women's emancipation.
To understand the significance of Traore's actions, ladies and gentlemen, we must actually look at Africa's deep history and records of resistance and, of course, unity. From the days of the Pan-African movement, Africa has actually sought solidarity, breaking free from colonial shackles, and, of course, ensuring that the continent's wealth actually benefits its people first. Okay, Burkina Faso, a nation or a country rich in resources like gold and, of course, fertile land, is now rejecting the old borders drawn by colonial masters or forces, and of course their foreign interest. Corporations and, of course, foreign nations have actually historically profited from Africa's resources without reinvesting in the people. Okay, but now, ladies and gentlemen, Traore's government or leadership promises to actually return every single dime generated from Burkina Faso's resources back to its citizens or people. He's actually positioning his country or state as the spearhead, okay, of a new era or time, one where Africa's shared resources like rivers, minerals, and, of course, sunlight force unity over the colonial divisions. With Africa's rising demand for sovereignty and independence, Burkina Faso's $64 billion roadmap to transform and change the nation is actually a momentous step towards continental unity. However, ladies and gentlemen, the journey towards real and complete sovereignty or independence is not actually without its challenges and difficulties. Captain Ibrahim Traore's bold economic vision, including the $64 billion investment investment was not planned, faces global was not friction. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, the African Continental Free Trade Area seeks to actually integrate or combine Africa economically, bypassing the dollar and of course relying on African resources for African growth specifically. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, the continent's push for independence and then sovereignty in global economics is actually met with resistance. The Western powers or forces, along with China specifically and the EU, view this as a threat to the current global order. The goal of breaking free from the dollar's grip and of course ensuring Africa controls its massive and vast resources is actually a bottleneck that many are actually trying to slow down, ladies and gentlemen. Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Traore's leadership, with its promise of economic transformation and change, represents the next frontier in this particular battle of sovereignty and independence. With millions still living in poverty and hardship, ladies and gentlemen, the stakes are actually higher than before. But the people's resolve, exemplified by Captain Ibrahim Traore's promise to actually invest in their future, cannot actually be ignored completely and absolutely. The world may actually resist, ladies and gentlemen, but Africa's trajectory is actually clear and unequivocal, and the determination of its leadership is actually undeniable. Yes! Looking ahead, the next 12 months, ladies and gentlemen, according to my perspective, will actually be critical for Burkina Faso's and of course their broader African continent, as Captain Ibrahim Traore's 64 billion investment begins to actually take shape. The world or globe will actually witness an economic and of course geopolitical shift that cannot actually be ignored or overlooked. Africa's vision of unity and of course togetherness and economic sovereignty is actually starting to materialize or happen in reality. And of course, countries like Burkina Faso will actually be at the forward front by investing in infrastructure, technology, and of course agriculture. Africa is actually no longer waiting for permission to actually thrive. Okay, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, it is actually already rewriting the global rules. The real advantage of Africa lies in its collective strength, its people, its resources, and of course its emergent leaders. Continental unity is actually the winner card. And of course, as the world actually watches, Africa specifically is actually watching the bridge, okay, or connection. This is the moment for every African to actually join the movement and of course take part in the creation of a global African future. Subscribe to actually be part of this particular historic journey, ladies and gentlemen, and turn on your notification bell so that whenever we actually have an analytical development like this, you can actually be part to be notified when I actually drop it on this channel. So kindly join us.